I stood at my father's grave while the wind cut through my coat and the priest spoke words I couldn't absorb. My name is Elara Vance. I am 24 years old. I teach literature at a small academy in the port city of Ashwick. I am nobody particularly significant until my father died and left me a sealed envelope. The lawyer, Mr. Aldridge, had thinning gray hair and the exhausted face of someone who had spent decades delivering final wishes. He handed me 2 envelopes in his cramped office above a bookshop. The first was white with my nickname in my father's shaking handwriting. Ella. The second was thicker with a single line in firmer script. Open only if the first one works. I broke the seal while my best friend Nora held her breath beside me. My father's handwriting filled less than 6 lines. Ella. Marry Kael Ashford. 3 years. Don't ask me why. One day you'll understand. I love you, Dad. I read it 3 times. On the 4th, Nora leaned over and read it too. Her hand flew to her mouth. Who is Kael Ashford? Mr. Aldridge cleared his throat. Your father left a name, a contact code, and a location in the Northern Coastal District. He asked that if you agreed, I should make the call. Did he think I would agree? He said my daughter doesn't refuse a serious request. I closed my eyes. Outside, a ship's horn sounded across the harbor. Call him. The lawyer dialed from the desk terminal and put it on speaker. 3 rings. A click. And a voice. Ashford. One word deep and cold, with the crisp consonants of someone who had never needed to raise his voice. Mr. Ashford, this is Percival Aldridge, attorney for Elara Vance. Oren was buried earlier today. His daughter has opened the envelope. A pause. 3 seconds. 4. I'll send transport the morning after tomorrow. I leaned toward the speaker. This is Elara speaking now. I wanted to hear your voice first. Another pause. Have you heard it? I have. Then it's decided. Transport will arrive at the address Aldridge has. Bring only essentials. The connection ended with a clean click. He sounds like a blade made of ice, Nora whispered. I didn't answer. I already knew I would climb into that transport on the appointed morning. That night, I found the leather box on my father's desk. Inside were medical bills. Experimental treatments at an institute in the capital. Imported medications. Almost all stamped paid by a fund I had never heard of. Only one bill remained open. The final one with my signature beside it. A co-signature I had done months ago without reading because he asked and I trusted him. The numbers blurred my vision. It was a debt large enough to consume everything I owned and still demand more. Someone had paid for everything that came before. Without my father telling me. Without me having any means to repay it. I packed my bag that same night. Simple dresses, 2 of my father's books, the bottle of bergamot, a small pouch of seeds from his drawer. What if he's monstrous Ella? Nora asked from the edge of the sofa. I thought of my father. Of his dirt-stained hands. Of the low songs he hummed while washing dishes. Of a man who, even while dying, had chosen his final words with care. My father wouldn't send me to a monster. Even gone, he wouldn't do that to me. The transport arrived at the exact hour. A sleek silver vehicle with tinted windows. Nora stood at the window with cold tea, pretending she wasn't crying. I didn't look back. 2 hours later, Thornhaven appeared. Silver gray light trees twisted by the northern wind, enormous estates behind iron gates. The Ashford estate was not a house. It was a creature made of stone planted before the sea for a century. Gray stone, 2 long wings, narrow vertical windows. A woman in her late 60s appeared at the top of the stairs. Snow-white hair, severe bun-high, collared charcoal dress. Mrs. Ashford. Her voice didn't warm as she spoke the name. I am Margot Deschamps, housekeeper of this estate. Your chambers are prepared. Mr. Ashford returns from the capital this afternoon. You can call me Elara. Mrs. Ashford is the form of address in this house. Follow me. My suite was too beautiful for someone like me. Canopy bed, dark wood furniture, cream reading chair beneath an enormous window. I went to the window and pulled back the curtain. And my breath left me. Below stretched a botanical sanctuary designed by hands I knew. Flower beds arranged in a spiral with the oldest shrubs at the center. One curve held deep indigo blooms arranged by height. The other held silver-white flowers with pale centers. And a row in the back with lavender blossoms climbing an old stone wall. I had seen that design on paper spread across our kitchen table. On the Saturdays, my father would sit with charcoal and straight edge explaining that a proper sanctuary garden begins with broken geometry. That garden was my father's design. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. Dad, what did you do here before me? That evening, I descended in a simple, dark blue dress. Margot led me to the dining room. A dark wood table for 12, with 2 places set at one end. On one wall, a massive portrait of a man with dark hair standing beside a flowering indigo shrub. Mr. Ashford's father. Margot said, deceased many years ago. The far door opened. Kael Ashford was tall with broad shoulders inside a perfectly tailored charcoal coat. Dark brown hair swept back, angular face, strong jaw. And gray eyes, the color of northern cliffstone that fixed on me for 2 seconds and revealed nothing. He didn't smile. Elara. Kael. Most people start with Mr. Ashford. I'm not most people. Something quick crossed his face. Not a smile, but a relative of one. Margot served pale soup in silence. He declined wine with a slight finger motion. I accepted. I'm sorry for the loss of your father. Thank you. He was a good man. I lowered my spoon. You knew him then? He worked here for a period when I was younger. He designed and tended the garden. The garden below my bedroom window. That very one. I felt my breath catch. I'll sign your contract. But first, you need to tell me something while looking at my face. Why did my father send me to you? Kael fell silent. His jaw shifted once. He glanced at his father's portrait, then back to me. Because I owed him. The only thing I could offer his daughter was security. Security from what? This is not the evening for that question. Then, this is the evening I don't sign. He studied me for a long moment. Not angry. Measuring. You will have all your answers, Elara. But one at a time. Tonight, the answer is this. I owed your father. What I owe is what I am offering you. A home, a name, and protection. I looked at the folio. I thought of the medical bills of Nora at the window. I thought of everything I would lose if I walked away. And I thought that this cold, severe man had looked at his father's portrait when I asked. He hadn't pretended he didn't hear. He had answered. Loan me a pen. I signed on the final line. The dessert course may arrive now. I won't be eating the fish regardless. This time, he almost laughed. A brief exhale through the nose, That was the first crack I had seen. That night at my window, I saw a figure standing in the dark garden. A man back turned tall in a long coat. Kael Ashford standing before the oldest shrub with both hands in his pockets. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass. Dad, what did you do here before me? 2 days later, I found the library. Floor to ceiling, dark wood shelves, rolling brass ladders, 2 leather armchairs before an unlit fireplace. An entire section held botanical texts. I pulled out a worn volume with faded gold lettering. The Conservatory Gardens of the Northern Coast. On the first page, a handwritten inscription. To the one who taught me that, the only subject that doesn't lie. That was my father's name. His voice came from behind me. I held the book against my chest before turning. Kael stood 2 paces away in a simple white shirt collar open by one button. The gray eyes in the yellow light seemed less like stone and more like still water. He taught you this. I entered without announcement. The library belongs to you as well. He took the book, his thumb, tracing the worn edge of the cover in a gesture that had the familiarity of deep habit. I recognized a man who had done this before, perhaps hundreds of times in silence. Did your father enjoy botany? He learned at the end of his life. Kael opened the book to the same inscription and closed it gently. He said it was the only discipline that never deceived. And you? Did you inherit the passion? He looked at me a second longer than necessary, then replaced the book at exactly the right height without needing to check. I inherited the passion from someone else, he said, and changed the subject before I could pull the thread. I descended to the garden after lunch. The fragrance was stronger up close. I touched an indigo petal and it drifted to the ground. Grace, darling. His voice made me turn. Kael was on the gravel path in a linen shirt and dark trousers. The wind lifted his hair. What? The flower you just touched. Grace, darling. White on the exterior, pale before its time. He approached and stopped a pace away. And this one? I indicated a taller indigo bloom. Remembrance of the North. It was the first one he planted here. He taught you the names. Kael turned toward the silver-white section. Old Moon Climber. This one blooms nearly year-round. It requires pruning at the shoulders, never at the crown. His voice had changed. It wasn't the CEO voice or the contract dinner voice. It was the voice of someone repeating lessons taught to him with patience when he was still small enough to receive them. Who taught you that? Kael turned his face to me. The gray eyes flickered to my mouth, then back to my eyes. From a good man, he said, and turned away before I could pull the thread further. I tucked a fallen petal into my pocket beside the familiar bergamot. A week later, Margot delivered a fabric-lined box. Inside was a deep forest green velvet gown. The note held 5 words in the handwriting of someone who signed documents. Ashford Hotel Capital. 8 o'clock. The Gala hall sat on the highest floor with soaring ceilings. Kael offered his arm and guided me through the crowd. He paused before a woman in crimson. Celeste Ashford Vale was tall with narrow shoulders and a smile painted deep burgundy. Ah, the mystery wife, she murmured, just loud enough for nearby guests. That designer doesn't dress just anyone, sweetheart. On you, the cut is unflattering in all the wrong places. I breathed through my nose. That designer dresses women, Celeste. Expensive fabric doesn't correct posture. Her mouth compressed into a thin line. Kael turned his head. The corner of his mouth curved upward. Then he approached Celeste, placed a hand on her elbow, and spoke 2 sentences into her ear. She went pale and vanished before the 3rd round of drinks. An elderly woman with ivory hair and navy approached me from Kael's blind side. She had a grandmother's smile and a cameo brooch. "Forgive the intrusion, my dear. I overheard your reply earlier. I thought it was magnificent. I'm Mrs. Henshaw, an old family connection." She took my hand in both of hers. "I heard you lost your father recently." My own husband was a cultivator in his younger days. One recognizes a cultivator's daughter from a great distance. My eyes flooded. I didn't know why I wept then. If you ever need tea with a boring old woman, I have a home in the Thornhaven district. Margot knows the way. She moved on. On the return journey, Kael remained silent for nearly 30 minutes. Then he spoke without turning from the glass. "Did your father teach you the names of the flowering shrubs?" "He did." Kael closed his eyes. His jaw shifted once. He was the finest man I ever knew. I stopped breathing. That wasn't the contract. That was the sentence of someone who had already wept for another man. But I didn't push. I understood that if I pressed further, he would raise the barrier again. For the remainder of the journey, my heart beat out of rhythm. As if it had discovered a passage between 2 rooms I had believed permanently sealed. 6 months passed. Winter faded slowly. I taught literature 3 mornings a week at a local academy. I read through the library. I wrote letters to Nora. I learned the cook's name was Hilda. Margot stopped being merely cold. She straightened my collar before classes and began lingering by the door while I ate alone. Kael began appearing in the library during late afternoons without announcement. He would select a volume settle into the armchair opposite mine and read without disturbing me. The first time I nearly fled. Later, I found it strange when he didn't appear. Later still, I brought 2 cups of tea and set his on the arm of his chair without comment. He drank it. One morning, he asked if I would accompany him to a meeting in the northern hills. The sky was a low uniform gray. An old investor. He said without looking up from the news sheet. He specifically asked that you attend. If you would prefer to remain, I can inform him you've fallen ill. I'll go. We departed after midday. Kael drove. It was the first time I had sat beside him in the front of a vehicle. His left sleeve was rolled, revealing a thin, pale scar I had never noticed. After 40 minutes, thunder cracked at a measurable distance. The storm wasn't predicted for today. It was predicted for tonight. The prediction arrived early. He exhaled a soft note through his nose. I turned toward the window to hide my smile. Then the rain began. A wall of water. The coastal road vanished in minutes. The investor's estate is still an hour away. What do you suggest? There's a family cabin about 15 minutes inland. We can wait for the storm to pass. The cabin was smaller than I imagined. 2 rooms, a central hearth, a wide bed covered with an old quilt. The roof had been built to withstand heavy weather, and the heavy weather fell as if summoned. Kael lit the fire. He crouched, adjusting the wood. The firelight caught his profile, and I realized I had never truly seen his face from any angle except the dinner table. There was a small scar on his right eyebrow. I sat on the rug before the hearth. Kael, how did you meet my father? He stayed with his back turned a moment longer, then settled on the rug a short distance away. He worked here for 2 years. His voice came low beneath the storm. He taught me the names of the plants because I followed him constantly. I was an irritating child. Your father liked irritating children. Kael smiled sideways, a small smile that traveled to his eyes. He taught me something essential without ever requesting anything in return. I owe him a debt that currency cannot settle. That is why you're here. So I came because of that debt. At first, he turned his face toward me. Now, it's not only that anymore. I held my breath. The silver-white blossoms are sleeping beneath the covering someone placed over them at the end of autumn. Was it you? Kael adjusted a log and sparks rose. It was me. Why? Because the man who planted them isn't here to cover them anymore. He looked at me without looking away. And someone must. Kael rose and found a hard loaf of bread cheese wrapped in waxed paper and an old bottle of red wine. We cut the bread with a kitchen blade, spread the cheese directly, and he opened the cork with his shirt sleeve. We ate in silence. Then I laughed. I laughed because the bread was hard as quarry stone, the cheese soft as clay, the wine too fine to accompany either, and because he was studying me instead of eating. Kael laughed with me. A low, husky sound that seemed like it had been stored inside for many years. Midnight passed without either of us marking it. The rain subsided and returned. The fire burned lower. I removed my shoes without thinking. Why are you looking at me that way? Because it's the first time I'm truly seeing you. He rose. He walked around the table. He crouched before me close enough that I could feel the heat of his body. He touched his thumb to my chin. Not gripping. Just touching. His question was in the pressure of his thumb. I answered by leaning my forehead against his. His mouth met mine with care. Then he abandoned the care. The kiss began slowly and transformed into something else between the first and second movement. Deeper, hotter, with his hand sliding up the back of my neck. I gripped his shirt and pulled. He lifted me from the floor in a single motion and carried me to the adjoining room without breaking the kiss. The old quilt received my weight before his. Don't ask me to stop. He said against my ear, his voice rough. Never. His hands understood the dress before removing it. Each button came free at a pace that held no urgency. He moved up my body with his mouth paused at my throat and drew one deep breath like someone drinking water after a long thirst. I ran my hands over his back beneath his open shirt and felt an old scar at his shoulder blade. He shuddered. Every movement of his was deliberate, but didn't conceal what lay beneath. Elara. He whispered between two movements. If I ever tell you to leave, don't go. I held his face with both hands. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to remember. I pressed my mouth to his and left the rest of the world outside with the rain. Afterward, lying against his chest, listening to the steady murmur of rain, I thought something I lacked the courage to speak aloud. That hadn't been contract intimacy. That was the first time someone had touched me with the fear of losing me. His hand rested on my stomach, his thumb tracing a slow circle. I closed my eyes. I woke with gray morning light. The bed was empty on his side. The quilt folded neatly, the dress draped on the chair, a glass of water on the nightstand. Kael sat on the sofa, already dressed, facing the window. The storm has passed. We can return now. Inside the vehicle, the road stretched dry. He drove with his gaze fixed ahead. Neither of us spoke for nearly an hour. When the estate appeared, he stopped at the curve of the gravel. Without turning off the engine, without turning his face, he spoke. The contract remains in effect. I gripped the safety harness. Fine. Then it remains for me as well. I exited alone. On the landing before the window overlooking the garden, I paused. Fine. It remains for me too. The following weeks were cold. I took lunch in town without him. I attended 2 public appearances without him. I smiled at photographers with composure. During library hours, he still appeared at the doorway, standing for 2 seconds in silent request. I would lower my book. He would depart. The tea in the second cup would cool on the arm of the empty chair. Margot observed everything and remarked on nothing. She simply began leaving a wool blanket folded on the sofa where I would doze off while reading. Nora called late one night. She listened to everything in silence, which was unusual for her. Ella, that man isn't angry. He's afraid. And a frightened man does foolish things. I ended the call. I stared out the window at the corner of the garden where the low light illuminated the ancient shrub with no man standing beside it that night. I thought of the sentence he had whispered in the cabin. If I ever tell you to leave, don't go. And I didn't understand. The night of the gala arrived 3 weeks later. Ashford Industries was celebrating its 50th anniversary. 300 guests had been invited. I chose the dress alone. Kael sent 3 options through Margot. I returned all of them. I chose the one I had purchased myself at a second-hand shop the day I returned from the cabin. A black gown of heavy silk without sheen with an open back to the waist. It wasn't mourning. It was a decision. I descended the main staircase alone. 300 faces turned. Kael stood at the foot of the stairs. He saw me and lost his color for a heartbeat. I reached him, took the glass from his hand, and placed it on a passing tray. Kael. He didn't respond. He offered his arm without comment and guided me into the ballroom. Mrs. Henshaw appeared near the terrace in navy and approached with both hands extended. She embraced me around the waist. How radiant you look tonight, my dear. My old friend would be so proud of his daughter-in-law. I smilede at her. She squeezed my shoulder and her thumb moved over the thin ring on her pinky in a brief repeated circle. I didn't register the ring. I registered her face. Theo Marchetti, the solicitor, paused before me. Mrs. Ashford, your husband is in the gallery. The address is in 10 minutes. I turned. Kael was crossing the ballroom toward us, his device still in hand. His expression was closed in a manner I had never witnessed. The gray of his eyes had returned to cliff stone. He stopped 2 paces from me. He looked at Mrs. Henshaw, who still had her hand on my shoulder. His gaze dropped to her thumb on the pinky ring. And something inside him, I am certain, fractured in that instant. Kael, dear, Mrs. Henshaw said. I came to greet our hostess. Forgive us, he said in a tone I didn't recognize. I need my wife. He took my hand. We crossed to the center before the ensemble. A microphone appeared in his hand. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for celebrating 50 years of history with us. Before the formal address, I would like to acknowledge one person. I want to thank my wife for fulfilling a challenging contract over these past 6 months. Elara. He looked directly at me. I never loved you. This was always a contract. And it concludes tonight. The ballroom stopped. It was a void. Someone behind me released a nervous laugh and swallowed it. 2 women lowered their glasses simultaneously. I looked at him. I removed my wedding ring. I took my time not because my finger resisted. I took my time because I wanted every single face to observe every millimeter of the gesture. I set the ring on a console table among white blossoms and heard the delicate click of metal against stone. I straightened, looked at Kael one final time, and turned my back. I exited through the terrace. I descended the side stairs and entered the service courtyard where my own transport was parked, the key waiting on the front tire rim. Margot had placed it there without being told. I drove without checking the mirror. My father's cottage on the southern coast was built of weathered timber, painted faded blue. The key rested beneath the clay pot. I sat on the wicker sofa in my intact black gown. And only there inside the house of my deceased father did I weep for the first time since the cemetery. Nora called twice. I switched off the device on the third attempt. 2 days later, in the late afternoon, I heard footsteps on the sand. Kael was crossing the low fence on foot. His evening attire from the gala still on his body, wrinkled and worn. His face was gray, carrying 2 full days without sleep. He stopped on the porch. He didn't knock. He waited. I opened the door. I didn't speak. I need an hour. If you're willing to listen. If not, I'll leave and won't return. I turned my back and left the door open. I sat on the wicker sofa with a blanket across my shoulders. He entered and stood in the center of the room with both hands at his sides. No pockets, no glass, no table. I had never seen him without a place for his hands. My father died when I was 12. He began. My mother 4 years before that. I was left in the custody of his second wife. Her name was Violetta Ashford. I pulled the blanket tighter. Violetta replaced my governess, my tutor, the cook, the gardener. Within a year, the entire household was under her control. And once no one remained who had known me from the inside, she began the punishments. Days without food. The attic locked from the exterior. A burn on my forearm that she explained as a household mishap. Things a child doesn't report because he has no one to tell. I closed my eyes. At 14, she hired a new gardener, Elara Vance. He taught me the names of the plants. One day he was planting a shrub with his sleeve pushed up, and I saw an old burn scar. He didn't speak. He simply showed me. Over 6 months, he gathered quiet evidence and delivered everything to a magistrate. Violetta was arrested before my 15th birthday. Elara requested that his name remain unmentioned. He refused payment. He said if I wanted to repay him, I should care for his daughter someday without her awareness. A hospital, a school, a home. My hands had begun to tremble. The treatments in the capital. I said, my voice barely a thread. It was me. Through an intermediary fund. Your father knew. You were never meant to discover it. The bills with the paid stamps are mine, settled before you arrived. The final one, your father insisted on keeping in his own name. He said, if you ever needed to understand why this marriage existed, that bill would be the start of the answer. The floor of the cottage softened beneath me. Why didn't you tell me? Because it wasn't a debt from your father to me. It was my debt to him. I only wanted him to have his final months in peace. He paused. 3 weeks after our wedding, I received the first message. Unknown origin. Whoever possesses your heart will pay. I hired a private investigator. Violetta was listed as escaped from a secure detention facility for 3 years. That's why I never touched you. That's why I kept the contract. Because if whoever was watching believed you were merely a contractual spouse, you remained outside the target. And the cabin. He closed his eyes. At the cabin, I failed. I had already fallen in love with you before the cabin. The night you answered Celeste, At the cabin, I permitted myself to possess one thing before returning it to safety. The next morning when I told you the contract remained, I was deceiving both of us. For your protection. Yesterday at the gala, I received a new message. You are being observed. Whoever possesses your heart will pay. I scanned the room and I saw Mrs. Henshaw with her hand on your shoulder, her thumb circling the ring on her pinky. Violetta did that my entire childhood when she gave me commands. It's the single habit she has never eliminated. She altered her face, dyed her hair, assumed a false identity, but she couldn't stop spinning the ring. I recognized it in 3 seconds. And in 3 seconds, I decided that the only way to preserve your life was to distance you from me publicly enough that Violetta would believe the marriage had ended. He lowered himself before the sofa. I used the cruelest sentence of my existence into a microphone against you. If you want to expel me from here, the door is on your side. I studied his gray face, his exhausted eyes. Are you finished? He nodded. I rose. The blanket slipped from my shoulder. Now it's my turn. I won't be rescued. My father sent me to that estate because he knew Violetta would return for you one day. And he sent me along so you wouldn't face it alone. But my father taught me far more than the name of a plant. He taught me to think. Your strategy is flawed. If you push me away, Violetta believes it's concluded, vanishes for another decade, and returns to collect from the next person you cherish. The solution is for her to fall here by her own words. We arrange a public reconciliation 6 days from now. Mrs. Henshaw will wish to come comfort me. I speak with her alone in the library. You, Theo, and Orson remain behind the service door with recording equipment. And I make her condemn herself. Kael looked up at me from the floor. Why would you do this? I reached toward him and touched his face with both hands. The first time since the cabin. Because my father loved you. And I learned to love who he loved. Because you covered his plants at the end of autumn. Because I am not the kind of woman who permits a foolish man to face a villain alone. Kael pressed his forehead into my palm. One more thing, I said near his face. When this is finished, you're going to tell me again what you said at the gala. But in reverse. And this time looking into my eyes, not into a microphone. I will? Good. Now, rise. We have a boring old woman to receive. I returned to the estate 6 days later. Orson had researched Mrs. Henshaw's history. 3 years without financial records, a residency certificate at a private clinic, a denied passport application. The 3 years matched the 3 since Violetta Ashford's escape. We needed a recording of her admitting she had been inside the estate before. On the return journey, Kael stopped the vehicle. You can still withdraw. I'm aware. If Violetta reacts, Orson has personnel in the garden, the service corridor, and the library's side entrance. Theo will be with me in the adjacent gallery recording through the device, Margot secured beneath the armchair. We've rehearsed this for 3 days. I placed my hand over his on the controls. His wedding ring was still there. Mine was in an inner pocket of my coat, warm against my chest. Kael appeared in a formal coat without a tie. I arrived later with the wedding ring back on my finger. Mrs. Henshaw arrived at 4 precisely. Bouquet of white blossoms in one hand, confections in the other. Pearl gray suit. My dear, I simply had to come. That poor man requires professional intervention, and you require a companion. Let me escort you to the library. Margot has already prepared tea. She recognized the route without assistance. I made no comment. The 2 leather armchairs before the cold hearth were turned toward each other. I took the left one, the one with the device secured beneath it. I poured the tea. Her hands trembled just slightly. You must be exhausted. 6 days of this. No one merits public humiliation. Do you love my husband? She blinked once and reassembled her smile. Oh, sweetheart, in the manner one loves a son who is a childhood friend. His mother died when he was 8. Yes, poor woman. Were you present at the funeral? I was in the front row. Do you recall the original gardener? The one who cared for the plants when Kael was an adolescent. Ah, that one. Oren. A decent man. Did you know him personally? She hesitated. Her thumb traveled over the ring. 1 short rotation, 2. Through the family, sweetheart. We would encounter each other at summer gatherings. Do you know the name of the first flowering shrub he planted here? She blinked again. The ring completed another rotation. A white one, I believe. Remembrance of the North. Indigo colored. It was the first. She straightened in the armchair, and the grandmotherly tone descended 2 registers. Kael is a dangerous individual. You weren't the first woman he has publicly humiliated. You're merely the first with the composure to walk away. That microphone wasn't accidental. He rehearsed every word. I know because I knew his mother, and she told me before she passed that she feared her own son. I have legal counsel who handles these situations with discretion. You could leave with permanent support in 6 months. 300 witnesses to the humiliation. A prenuptial arrangement with substantial compensation. I can accompany you personally. Consider it. Every word was calibrated for a woman who had just been publicly devastated. If I didn't know what I knew, I would have leaned into her embrace and wept. I lifted the cup. I drank slowly. I set it down. You are remarkably well informed about a provision in a prenuptial arrangement that never left this estate. And about a mother who passed when Kael was 8 on an afternoon when, according to medical records, she had been in a medically induced coma for 2 days. Her ring accelerated. Documents can be misfiled, sweetheart. Kael's mind is disturbed. Anything he told you, review it carefully. When did you learn Kael's childhood name? Which name, sweetheart? Kay? He told me only 2 people in the world called him that. His mother while she lived, and his stepmother during the punishments. Her hand stopped on the ring. It was only a second, but it was the second I required. I didn't know his stepmother. Curious. I have 5 images of you in Kael's archives from gatherings during that period. You appear in 3, standing directly beside her, smiling. Her thumb spun 3 times in succession now, beyond control. Have you ever been inside this estate previously? Sweetheart, I believe you're confused. I'm not confused. I'm recording. The service door opened. Kael entered first. Behind him, Theo holding a compact recording device. Behind them, Orson Lazar with gray hair. And behind Orson, 2 uniformed officers. Mrs. Henshaw rose. The cup slipped and overturned. Violetta. Kael said, his voice the lowest I had ever heard. Sit down. She didn't sit. She looked at me. The sweetness drained from her face with the ease of removing a cloth mask. Underneath was the same face with different architecture. Hard tight at the jaw. Wretched child. She said to Kael, You've pursued me for years. 20. He replied, There won't be additional time. An officer took her arm. She looked at me one final time. The gardener's daughter. He taught you thoroughly. I didn't answer. Violetta crossed the spiral bed between the silver-white blossoms without turning back. Elara Vance's plants observed her departure for the final time. I sat on the stone bench near the center circle. Kael sat beside me. "It's finished." He rested his hand on mine on the cold stone. He didn't squeeze. He simply rested it there. The following morning, he waited at the start of the gravel path in simple trousers, no coat. His gray eyes held the peace of someone who had finally slept. He extended his arm. I accepted. We walked through the garden slowly. At the rear, near the low stone wall, I paused before a small shrub I had never noticed. Closed white buds, slender stem. And this one? Kael was silent for a moment. Remembrance of the friend. Memory of a friend. Did my father plant it? He did on the final day he worked here. I was 15. He called me to the back and said, "When you miss me, come here. You don't need to speak. She remembers for you." My throat constricted. I came often for many years. In the recent months, I began coming here with you in my thoughts. Every night, I believed I would lose you forever. I wept fully for the first time since my father's funeral. Kael held me without pressure and waited. When the weeping eased, he withdrew from his pocket a small metal circle. My wedding ring. He had retrieved it from the console table that night. "I loved you from the night you answered Celeste at the Gala." He set his gray eyes on mine. No microphone, no 100 faces. "I loved you before the cabin. I loved you at the cabin. I loved you every dawn that I walked from the west wing to the east wing and halted in the middle of the corridor because I couldn't enter. I love you now, and I will love you afterward if you'll permit me." I extended my left hand. "I'll permit you." He slid the ring onto my finger. I closed my hand over his and squeezed back for the first time in 6 months. We remained beneath the remembrance of the friend, with the coastal wind moving through the shrubs and the sea sounding in the distance. Then we climbed the stairs to the estate, because Margot was waiting to serve breakfast, and because life, for the first time since I had buried, my father didn't need to hurry.